Welcome back to the Calculated Risk Podcast. I am Tyler Shoemaker, joined as always by Kelley Ford. Rivalry week, I can never say that right, has come and gone. Everyone pretty much took care of business. All the favorites pretty much won. Obviously, Ohio State, Michigan played, a really epic game that Michigan came out on top of. Kudos to them for that. Georgia, won by 8 against Georgia Tech. Alabama needed a miracle to beat Auburn. I mean, I don't think anyone played particularly great. Louisville lost to Kentucky. So, a lot of these top teams that are going to be playing again this weekend, definitely I think maybe had look ahead spots last week and they were not super focused. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on that. We're going to spend most of the show diving into what you care about, which is what the playoff committee might do Tuesday night, how that's going to look and how that's going to get shaped as we head into conference championship weekend. So Kelley, any initial thoughts on week 13? If not, we can get right into the resume rankings.
Yeah, I would just say, Tyler, you're right. I mean, the only, quote, upset that we had really of the contenders was Louisville losing to Kentucky. And I think most people agreed Louisville had a very slim path as it was to make it to the playoffs. So probably not a lot of disruption there. It was just a weekend of so close. So many of the top contenders were so close to going down. I mean, Georgia was in a closer game than they should have been with Georgia Tech. Washington was in a closer game than they should have been with Washington State. Florida State, a closer game than they should have been with Florida. You're not even talking about, I guess, Oregon took care of it pretty good. Texas, of course, romped Texas Tech. Alabama, I mean, what? Like, I don't even know what to say, but they get by Auburn. It felt like a weekend. Of course, Michigan wins the game that they're favored in. Ohio State has the ball late with a chance, and it doesn't work. So all of these games, it's rivalry week. They're going to be close. They hate each other. Throw the records out. All those cliches, they're said because they're true. And we saw that. It felt like it was a weekend of almost, a weekend of what if. So many top contenders came close. They all the favorites minus Louisville survive, and it sets up what's going to be a really good conference championship game weekend, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, Tyler, I'm ready to get into what do your resume rankings, what do my most deserving rankings, what do they look like, and then also what do we think the committee is going to do? So yeah, man.
All right, so with that, we'll get into our updated resume rankings, and again, we're going to focus the show primarily on, who our rankings indicate, are contenders to get in the playoff, depending on what happens this weekend. We'll talk about like the Tulanes of the world on our later week show on the championship preview show. But for this episode, we're going to focus primarily on really Kelley's top 8 and 8 of my top 9. I have Liberty at number 8 in terms of resume. They're obviously not going to get in the playoff, so not going to talk about them on this show, but Oregon sitting there at number 9 for me, at number 8 for Kelley. They're very much alive, favored by 9.5 over Washington, who beat them earlier in the season. We're again, our numbers are pretty much in alignment. One big discrepancy to note here: you've got Ohio State 4, I've got them 6, and that's going to be important because you've got them ahead of both Florida State and Texas. I have them behind both Florida State and Texas. So, that is something to keep in mind here as we think about what the committee might do this week and, most importantly, on Sunday.
Yeah, so for me, Tyler, I guess let me just start with, I do have Michigan number 1. I said last week the winner of Ohio State Michigan was going to be number 1 of the most deserving, and they are. It's really still not a huge gap between Michigan, and then I have a clump of teams, though. Georgia at 2, Washington at 3, Ohio State at 4, Florida State at 5. Tyler, they all, in their raw most deserving score, have a score of 1.000. So rounded to the nearest 1,000th, I have 4 teams tied at number 2. Tyler, I have never had 3 teams tied to the nearest 1,000th, let alone 4. And if I ever had 2 tied, it wasn't anywhere near the top 30, let alone the top 5. Like, Tyler, it is insane. Again, they're not rounded to infinity. They're rounded to the nearest 1,000. So I posted this on Twitter. Some people said, how did you decide that Florida State loses the tiebreaker and ends up at number 5? Well, it's not really that Florida State's losing a tiebreaker. It's that as I round out, or as you take out those scores farther than the nearest 1,000th, they're not actually tied to like the exact decimal. They're just tied when you round it here. But the point is, all these teams have incredibly similar resumes at this point in terms of deservedness by my numbers. I do then have Texas with a 0.995. So they're right there. Alabama, 0.988. They are right there. Oregon, there's a drop down to Oregon at number 8, 0.901. I've talked about this before. I'm going to say it again. I am now very concerned that we are going to have an instance of a team make the playoff that is not, quote, deserving of a top 4 spot. The committee, in all the years I've been doing my most deserving rankings, the committee has not only gotten the top 4 teams right by my numbers, they've actually gotten them in the right order. I am very nervous this year that Oregon is going to buck that trend because you said they're a 9.5-point favorite. I believe the committee, if Oregon wins, I believe the committee will put them in. Regardless of almost anything else that happens here, I think the committee will put Oregon in the top 4. I can't say for certain right now because we don't know what the scores of these games are, and that does have an impact on the most deserving rankings. But I can say I would be very surprised if even if Oregon wins by a healthy margin against Washington, they make up enough ground in my most deserving rankings to have a resume that is worthy of top 4 inclusion. Is this a top 4 football team in terms of power ratings? Absolutely. I have them in my top 4. They've been in my top 4 for much of the second half of the year. I mean, the entire second half of the year. But from a resume standpoint, which is what I believe we should be doing when we're talking about playoff spots, they don't have it, and I don't think they will, even with a win over Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. So for me, what is the committee going to do this week? I think is going to be telling. I think Tyler, the committee's going to stack them up: Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Washington 3. I actually think Ohio State's going to still be in there at number 4. The committee had Ohio State 2 last week. The committee's had them at number 1 previously, losing on the road by 6 to the committee's number 2 team, my number 1 power rated team, which I think is more important, but the committee's number 2 team. I don't think they're going to drop Ohio State outside the top 4 this week. I think they're going to have Florida State right there at 5, right where they were. Because again, when you look at it on the surface, they beat a 5-7 Florida team by just a handful of points. That is not how I assign credit to resumes, but that is how the committee has historically assigned credit to resumes. They're saying, okay, you beat a 5-7 team by a handful of points. Now, you had a backup quarterback. So did they, though. So they're considering both of those things. I think the committee keeps Florida State at 5, knowing that if they beat Louisville, they'll vault them in. But I think for now, the committee's going to keep them at 4, Ohio State at 4, and Florida State at 5. And I don't think they're going to make any changes to what they've done behind that either. I think Oregon stays 6. I think Texas stays 7. I think Alabama stays 8. Like, I don't think the committee's doing a whole lot here other than dropping Ohio State down to a couple spots. That's what I think, Tyler. It'll be interesting to see what the committee does, but that's what I think they will do. But you see on the screen for those watching what I think they should do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I honestly hadn't considered that prospect that Ohio State would be sitting there at 4 this week. Then really sweating out conference championship weekend because Buckeye Nation, I'm sure, is going to be rooting hard for Louisville and Oklahoma State this weekend, no doubt. Kelley, so you mentioned you've got these teams are tied to the nearest 1,000, and you clarified that they're not actually tied when you continue going out. But do you, one, what would your tiebreaker be? And two, if you don't mind me asking, how much, if any, like resume boost do you award for a conference champion? Because we know the committee does.
Yeah. So you would never have a tie to the infinity decimal points. The way that my numbers are set up, you wouldn't have a tie because even if you had the exact same record as somebody, the way that it's calculated based on getting your credit and it's your opponent's power rating at either the time of the game or current, whichever's greater, like that would never be tied. And then you factor in the part about the relative scoring margin. So like, even if you had the exact same score lines, like it wouldn't be tied. But so I wouldn't ever need to have a quote tiebreaker. Now, if you have 4 teams that are tied to the nearest 1,000th and you want to apply some subjective tiebreakers, like go for it. And to me, then you're looking at, head to head and some other things. Conference championships, to me, I know the committee values them and they're very important. I think winning a conference championship is very, very important. It's something that every team, well, not every team, but most teams strive for every year. And that's in their goals, their stated goals, the contenders year in, year out. You want to win your conference. Like that's a goal. And you should be proud of that. Not every conference is created equal. So my issue is when you're assigning credit, committee, for a conference championship, does a conference championship of the SEC equal a conference championship of the MAC, equal a conference championship of the Pac-12, equal a conference championship of the Sun Belt? Like, you're saying conference championships. So does one equal the other? To me, no. There's a different level of difficulty to winning each of those individual conferences. Now, that being said, so that's my kind of gripe with it. My most deserving rankings, there is no extra credit or bonus or bump that you get for winning a conference championship. And here's the rationale, because people say that's dumb or that's incorrect. You should do that. Here's why I don't. we're not going to get Texas, Oklahoma again. We're going to get Texas, Oklahoma State. But for the purposes of conversation, let's say we had Texas, Oklahoma playing this weekend in Arlington, neutral site. And the reason I'm using them and not Oregon, Washington, two teams that have already played, is because the first game was also a neutral site. Why is it, what makes it more difficult for either Texas or Oklahoma to win the rematch in Arlington? Again, I know they're not having a rematch. For the hypothetical, what makes it more difficult for that team to win the rematch in Arlington than it was to win the original game during the regular season in Dallas in the Cotton Bowl? The answer is there is no reason. It is not more difficult. It's the same two teams. Granted, they could have different power ratings right now, right? Because these teams aren't the exact same versions of themselves that they were back in week 5 or whenever it was that they played. So from that standpoint, it could be more difficult for the average top 25 team to beat either one of these teams at a neutral site because maybe they're playing better, maybe they're playing worse now than they were at that time. But why am I going to assign additional credit for winning a game that, power ratings aside, is no more difficult to win today than it was in September? Like, to me, that doesn't make any sense. And I get it. There's a trophy on the line, and this is American sports. And by golly, we play for trophies, and we got to have playoffs. Like, don't even get me started on the MLS and playoff. Like, the rest of the world doesn't do postseasons. They just do this regular season, and the winner over the course of X number of games, that's the winner. But this is America, and we like playoffs, and we like postseason, and we like trophies. I get all that. I'm American. I was born and raised here. I've only ever lived here. I get it. I'm not advocating for us to do away with playoffs. But it's not more difficult to win this game. So why am I going to give you mathematically more credit for winning this game? Like, I'm not. So, and for Oregon and Washington, Washington has a better opportunity to improve their resume this weekend than Oregon because Oregon's a higher power rated team. Washington's a higher ranked team, and they should be. We've already talked about that. But if Washington wins, they're going to get a bigger bump to their resume than Oregon will because I have Oregon as a higher power rated team. So it's more difficult for the average top 25 team to beat Oregon in Las Vegas this weekend than it is for the average top 25 team to beat Washington. And Washington fans might say, that's crazy. We already won this game. I understand. And this is good for you because you are getting more credit than your opponent would if they're beating you. So if anything, Oregon fans should be the ones that are upset. No way. We're going to play a top 3, 4, whatever committee ranked team. Yeah. And you're going to play my number 13 power rated team. So anyway, that was a really long answer. I wanted to get a lot in there. So, Tyler, I do not assign extra credit. I'm curious if you do with your resume rankings. I have gone back and forth on this. I have strongly considered why and why not to do this. It boils down to me it comes down to, from a mathematical standpoint, the difficulty to win this game is not enhanced because you're playing for a trophy. That's across the board, any team, anywhere, even the games that are hosted at the highest site. Pac-12 or the Mountain West Championship game, it's Boise State at UNLV. The American Championship game, we've got SMU going to Tulane. Those games, you're going to get credit for beating that opponent at that location based on their power rating. You're not going to get a bump because there's a trophy on the line because the trophy on the line doesn't make it more difficult to win the game. So that's my answer, Tyler.
And I agree with you. I also don't. It is something that I've contemplated just because, like I said, we know the committee does. For right or wrong, we know the committee does. So the debate I kind of have with myself is like, okay, well, am I trying to kind of do my own thing in my own lane, or am I trying to give people insight into what the committee might do? And I go back and forth about what the right answer to that question is. For now, I'm staying in my own lane and just doing my formula without assigning any additional credit for the conference championship. Yeah, it's going to be wild again. I don't know that we're going to have quite a shakeup like we did, like last year. USC loses, Ohio State backdoors their way in. I don't know that we're going to have that this year. I mean, I'm very intrigued to see the Big 12 championship because I think both of those teams have been very Jekyll and Hyde. Now, obviously, Texas only has the one loss to Oklahoma, but Oklahoma State has looked really good some weeks, and some weeks they've gotten their butts kicked by South Alabama. So, like, you don't know which one of these Mike Gundy teams will show up. However, I think historically he has been pretty good as an underdog. I'm curious for that game. If you're rooting for chaos, I don't know how much hope there is that Oklahoma State actually beats Texas. Now, Florida State, on the other hand, we'll get into these matchups on the later week show, but that line has, I think it was like 6.5. Florida State -6.5 at one point. As of this morning, it was down to like 2.5. We're recording this Monday afternoon. It was down to like 2.5. So there's some money, some heavy money coming in on Louisville here early in the week. So I'm very curious for that as well. And then obviously Georgia, Alabama. God forbid a scenario where Alabama wins and Georgia's sitting there with one loss as a non-champ, and there's a lot that's gonna go down this weekend. The rankings could potentially look a lot different. I'm kind of the mindset that probably most of these favorites are going to take care of business, but I'm definitely curious to see how it plays out. Like I said, we want to keep this one short and just focus on what the potential playoff might look like heading into Selection Sunday. Kelly, any final thoughts here on Week 13 or resumes heading into this weekend or anything like that before we wrap up?
Yeah, since we won't be back together, Tyler, to talk about rankings and all of that, we're going to get together one more time before Selection Sunday, and that's going to be to preview Conference Championship games. So we're not going to talk a lot about what we think is going to happen with the rankings at that point. So I want to get into really quickly who controls their own path to the playoff here, and we're going to know for certain, I think, after we see the rankings on Tuesday with the updates from Rivalry Week incorporated. But to me, Tyler, there's 4 teams that hands down control their own path. Of course, that would be Georgia, Michigan, Washington, and Florida State, right? If those 4 teams wins their games this weekend, they are in. There's no debating that. You agree?
Yep, 100%.
Perfect. So, of the other teams that are in that conversation, obviously Ohio State, who I actually think the committee is going to have number 4. At worst, they're going to have them number 5. Like I cannot imagine the committee dropping Ohio State below any other one-loss team, because no matter what the committee's looking at, your best loss. I don't like doing that, but the committee does. Ohio State would have the best one, right? Because they lost to Michigan, who's probably going to be the committee's number 2 team. That's going to be the highest ranked team that any of these contenders have lost to. Your quote best win, like that probably goes to that would go to Texas because they've beaten Alabama, who's up there. But then Ohio State, they got Penn State, who's probably going to be a top 10 team here this week after Louisville moves down. So I mean, I don't see a scenario in which Ohio State falls below them. So Ohio State's in there. They certainly don't control their own destiny by any means because they're done playing. Let's go to the next team, the committee that I think is going to have ranked there, Oregon. If Oregon wins, I'm not sure that Oregon, Texas, or Alabama, because those are the 3 teams left, I'm not sure any of those teams actually control their own destiny. I think they all put themselves in they have to win, right? If they lose, they're out. We know that. We just said that. But if they win, I think they all put themselves in a really good position to be considered strongly. But I don't think any of them actually control it, because like if Oregon wins and the other favorites win, then I think they're good. But what if we get into a scenario where you're comparing like the one-loss teams, Georgia, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ohio State? What if they're all there with one loss? So to me, I'm not sure there's another team that controls their own destiny, Oregon, Texas, or Alabama. Do you disagree with that, Tyler? Do you think any of those 3 teams with a win, doesn't matter what else happens, they're in?
I think Alabama, if they beat Georgia, I think they're in.
So here's the scenario. Hold on.
Go ahead.
No, stay on Alabama. Don't do your Alabama thing, and then I want to come back.
Yeah. So on Alabama is the only one I would disagree with, just because 1, brand recognition. 2, I think there's been enough narrative created that like, oh, that's not the same team now that lost to Texas in week 2, even though we just saw them almost lose to Auburn. But I think the narrative is there. 2-time undefeated defending national champ. Like if you slay that dragon in the conference championship, I cannot fathom the committee actually having the guts, regardless of what any metrics or rankings like ours might say. I can't fathom a scenario where Alabama wins and gets left out.
2 things. 1, I want to say if Alabama wins, then they probably end up above Texas and my most deserving. So I'll just say that. But that aside, what about here's a scenario where I don't necessarily agree with you, Tyler, is because I get what you're saying, but what about this? So Michigan wins, Washington wins, Florida State wins. Those 3 have all won. They're in. Those are 3 teams. That's 3 spots that are taken. Alabama beat Georgia, and Texas wipes the floor with Oklahoma State. I mean, they beat them by 30. Now you've got 3 one-loss teams there. Texas, Big 12 champions who beat Alabama in the regular season. Alabama, SEC champs who just beat Georgia. And Georgia, who's 12-1, 2-time defending national champs. 1 spot. You think Alabama gets it?
I do. I mean, I think that scenario, I I would advocate for Texas in that scenario because, like we've said on the show a million times, like playing the game on the field has to matter, and Texas won the game on the field. I think there's enough narrative out there. Like I just can't imagine. Like I think Texas would be sitting there at number 5. I think they would put Alabama in. I don't agree with it, but I think that's what the committee would do. It. Those are two different answers. I would put Texas in that scenario. I don't think the committee will. I think the committee would put Alabama in.
So you think the committee goes Alabama 4, Texas 5, Georgia 6?
Yep.
I think the committee would go Texas 4, Alabama 5, Georgia 6. I think the committee, and we've seen it to this point, they've honored the head-to-head. Now, head-to-head's only used as a tiebreaker in their protocols when resumes are comparable, when teams are deemed comparable. I don't think we'll see where they are this week, but I think Texas is still going to be 7. I think Alabama is still going to be 8. I don't think that they're going to leave out Texas given the head-to-head in Tuscaloosa this year. I don't think they will. If they do, and my own numbers suggest that they should, like from the resume rankings, likely my most deserving rankings would likely have Alabama as the more accomplished team. I personally actually am going to say, yeah, I think Texas should get that nod because they won that game. And if we're not honoring the head-to-head at the end of the year, what are we doing? So, okay, that's interesting. And it gets even more muddied, Tyler. Like it's if Florida State loses, well, that opened up a spot, and now you can put both Texas and Alabama in. But let's say Florida State wins, Michigan wins. What if Oregon beats Washington and Alabama beats Georgia? Now you've got 2 spots, but there's 4 teams vying for it. 5 teams vying for it. You've got the 12-1 Texas Big 12 champs, 12-1 Alabama SEC champs, 12-1 Oregon Pac-12 champs, 12-1 Georgia, who lost to Alabama, 12-1 Washington, who just lost to Oregon. Now, those 5 teams, 2 spots, Tyler. Who do you put in?
Pac-12's out. Pac-12's totally out in that scenario. Yeah.
So Oregon's out.
Yeah. In that scenario, I think.
You think the 2 that go are Alabama, Texas?
Yeah, because
even though Oregon has been ranked ahead of both those teams the entire time. And in Conference Championship game weekend, they're going to have a better chance to, quote, improve their resume in the committee's eyes by playing a Washington team that's going to be ranked number, 3, instead of an Oklahoma State team that's going to be ranked where, in around 18, 17, somewhere there?
I just feel like Oregon would be picking up, well, I guess I can't say the weakest because Texas will be playing Oklahoma State, but it's like, I don't mean to disrespect Washington. They're undefeated, and like that is a fantastic achievement. But looking through the lens of the power ratings, like you and I both have Washington in like the mid-teens. Like
everybody does.
Beating them on a neutral field when you're a 10-point favorite just doesn't do a whole lot for me when you haven't really won many other impactful games this year.
I agree with you. That is not how the committee does it, though. We know that they look at their ranking, ranked wins, record against teams with above 500, whatever that means. Okay. Here's the biggest takeaway for me, Tyler. The committee has put in this scenario, the committee's put themselves in this bind. Oregon should have never been number 6 at no point this year.
No.
Should Oregon have been number 6? They should have been number 8. You have them number 9. They've been number 8 for me basically since this thing started with the committee ranking, like in the timeline that the committee's been ranking. They've been number 8 for me. That's where they've deserved to be ranked. They are better. They're better than the number 8 team in the country. That is not even a question at this point. They look so gosh darn good. Are you gonna take anybody over them at this point on a neutral field? Maybe Georgia. I don't even know people that are going to take Michigan over Oregon on a neutral field at this point. My numbers would, but I'm not sure the betting public would. I don't know where Vegas would set the line. They'd probably open it with Michigan as a slight favorite and see what happened. But I don't think anybody's taking Oregon or taking anyone to beat Oregon on a neutral field, except for maybe they're taking Georgia just because of the track record there, which again, you could argue the validity of that. But the committee has put themselves in this bind by having Texas and Alabama behind Oregon this whole time. And now how are you going to rationalize jumping them when they play a higher ranked team? Not now, Alabama's going to get number 1, Georgia. But when they, how are you going to put Texas over them? So the thing is, like, how do you put Alabama above Texas without putting Texas back above Oregon? Like they've created this like pretzel for themselves, and it's all because they're inconsistent in how they evaluate teams. They take a resume for team A, they take eye test for team B, and they try to mash it together. Well, now these inconsistencies could bite them in this type of scenario.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. Like, you're right. Like, to the rational human being, they've put themselves in this pretzel. But the fact of the matter is, all they're going to do is say, like, well, we're going to do whatever the hell we want to do, and we're going to put the 4 teams in that we want to put in. Like, their rationale and their criteria, to use the Isaiah Thomas quote from the Last Dance. Like, I don't know what the criteria is, but they change it every week. So I like we said, there's a lot to get resolved here this weekend. It's going to be fascinating to see, the mental gymnastics that the committee goes through to finagle the rankings however they see fit. But nonetheless, I mean, I do think this is a year where we should, regardless of what ends up happening, we should have 4 quality teams in. I think the only way, and this is not their fault, the only way that's not true is if Florida State wins and gets in, with the backup quarterback, and they clearly are not the same team without Jordan Travis. So I'm not saying they wouldn't deserve to get in because they'd be undefeated, but I think any of the other 3 teams would be licking their chops to play backup quarterback Florida State in the playoff.
I don't disagree with you. Again, not their fault. That's the reality of the situation. Yep, and we'll break all that down, I'm sure. I had to get your thoughts on who controls their destiny, who controls their own path, and then what happens in these kind of unique scenarios, or interesting scenarios, not unique, interesting scenarios. I hope we have 4 undefeated Power 5 undefeated teams at the end of the day, because to me, that's the only scenario that I see here where my 4 most deserving match the committee's top 4 teams, and maybe not even in the right order, probably, but maybe not, because I do think Georgia with the win over Alabama will probably go above Michigan in my most deserving. Washington would stay at 3, Florida State would go 4. I think that's how the committee would stack them up. So that's the only scenario where I think this streak of my most deserving match in the committee holds up, and it's not like that. You asked earlier, should I be trying to go my own path, or should I be trying to give people kind of what the committee is going to be doing? Tyler, the way I think about it, I kind of flip that question on its head. I don't worry about what the committee is going to do or what they have done or any of that. I put out what I think should be done, how I think we should evaluate, to try to expose that method to as many different people as possible. I'll put it out there, and lots of people hate it. Some people like it. It's the way it is. I'm not doing it for any other reason than to try to put out there what I think the path we should be going is, because if enough people one day get on board with that, perhaps we as a community can influence the decision makers.
Yeah.
This is like a super, like, Kelley, there's no way you're pie in the sky thinking here. Like, hey, if we keep trying to beat down this door of what should we do, how should we go about doing this, perhaps one day we might be able to influence the way it's actually done. If we try to conform to, let's make our methods, let's make our processes match what we think the committee's going to do, now we're just feeding into that thinking, which I don't believe is the right way to go about it in the first place. And we're not doing any good, I don't think. So that's how I've kind of approached that philosophical question is, let's put out what I think is right, the right way to do it, and let's see what sticks, and let's see how many people get mad at it. And a lot of people get mad, and that's okay. But any other scenario, I mean, Tyler, there's going to be there's scenarios here where I think Ohio State, depending on the outcome of these games, Ohio State's a top 4 most deserving team, depending on the outcome of these games. Like, by my formula, by my numbers.
Yeah, no, that's certainly they're certainly within the realm.
Yeah, and they're Ohio State's. I mean, what's the path for Ohio State at this point? Like, let's what's the path? Meaning, how does the committee put Ohio State in? A Pac-12 team will go in before Ohio State. Doesn't matter who wins. A Pac-12 team is in. A SEC team is in over Ohio State. Doesn't matter which one. Michigan is in over Ohio State. Even if they lose to Iowa, Michigan's in over Ohio State. Yep. That's 3 spots. Here's the path for Ohio State. Louisville beats Florida State, and Oklahoma State beats Texas.
Yeah, that's the only path I see.
And actually, Georgia beats Alabama. Yeah, because if Alabama beats Georgia, they're both in. Yep. So for Ohio State to get in, they need Michigan to win. No, they don't. They need Georgia to win. It'd be helpful if Michigan won. They need Georgia to win. They need Oklahoma State to win. They need Louisville to win. If you want to make it extra clean, you probably want Washington to win as well, because you don't really want to be in a situation where I don't think they take both Pac-12 teams. I don't think they take Washington or maybe they would. I don't know what the committee would do. Heck,
I don't know. The Pac-12 thing is interesting, because if Oregon wins and those teams split, I think that does crack the door for Okay, well then, like on paper, who's the most deserving? And on paper, Ohio State, I think in that scenario would have the best resume of the three. So I
But the committee
I don't
thinks
know. I
Oregon's a
don't
better
know.
team, and they have a conference championship. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm
I
telling you
don't I
the
don't know.
committee
I don't
thinks
know. I don't think the committee thinks Oregon's a better team, but they would have the conference championship, sure.
even after beating undefeated Washington, you don't think that changes the committee's opinion that they're the better team than Ohio State?
Not not after the
Remember,
way
the
like
committee doesn't see Washington as number 13, they see him as number 3.
I know, but I think had Ohio State gotten beat down by Michigan this year like they did the last couple of years, but the fact that that game was essentially a toss up down to the final minute, I think that's going to bode well for Ohio State in that scenario. I'm not saying the committee would or should necessarily put Ohio State in over Oregon at that point, but I'm just saying if it happened, I wouldn't be absolutely stunned.
Fair enough. All right, I took us way past where we wanted to go. I just
That's all right.
we weren't going to get another chance to talk about this stuff, and I do think it's important.
Yeah.
This is what people care about. I mean, for as much as I like to talk about the regular season, and I think every single Saturday is awesome, and that's why we love it. I know I'm in the minority. Most people care about the postseason. Most people care about the playoff. Most people care about it's going to 12 teams. Which also, Tyler, I tweeted about this the other day. Somehow it didn't occur to me until just this weekend as I'm thinking about things. How ironic is it, dude, that we've had a 14 playoff for a decade now, and we've had 5 power conferences. Next year, we're going to a 12-team playoff. We're expanding the playoff. Gosh dang it. It's going to be great. We love it. We're excited. And we're going to 4 power conferences. Like, wait, no, hold on. Is it too late to retract our expansion efforts? Because
Yeah.
the whole reason we needed an expanded playoff for a lot of people was access. And we have what if we have 5 undefeated power 5s? How are you going to leave one out? Well, guys, you can't have that anymore. We only have 4. So oh my gosh, could we have could this
I'm with you. Yeah.
the whole conference realignment? I hate it. Could it have happened 2 years earlier before we agreed that we were going to expand the playoff? Because if we would have had this, is expansion still imminent? Probably, because there's more money in it. But could it have been delayed at least the 2 more years of the additional or the original 4-year or 14 playoff contract? Maybe. So anyway, it's just like incredibly ironic to me that for a decade we've had a 4-team playoff and 5 power conferences. And now, the first year we're going to have 4 power conferences, they say, all right, this is the year we're going to 12. Like, oh, man.
You know what? We're going to have an off-season pod that we're just going to go 2 hours, and I'm just going to let you cook on playoff expansion.
People won't like that. They won't like that.
All right. I think that's going to do it. We will be back later this week to actually get into these matchups of championship weekend. It's going to be a lot of fun as we discussed. Like, there's a lot of scenarios out there depending on how this shakes out. So I'm looking forward to getting in the numbers on those matchups. But until next time, for Kelley Ford, I'm Tyler Shoemaker, and that was Calculated Risk.